Warner Brothers Discovery is officially taking offers, and I'm breaking down who put in a bid and who might win right now. Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with a big industry broccoli story for you, and this is going to be yet another seismic event in the entertainment industry, as if we haven't seen enough of those over the last 7 or 8 years. It's been no secret for several weeks now that Warner Brothers Discovery is for sale, and yesterday was the deadline for the first group of non-binding offers. Now, as of the time I'm recording this video, we don't have the confirmed details of what the offers are, but we do know that 3 companies have reportedly thrown their hat into the ring: Comcast, Paramount, and Netflix. Now that the cards are basically on the table, the bids are going to be evaluated, and soon WB Discovery will start accepting legally binding bids, which are official offers from each company to buy the studio. Everybody involved has their own priorities, which we're going to break down shortly, but first, let's recap just how we got here. I've been covering this a lot on my live show, but very briefly, back in September, news leaked that Paramount Skydance, fresh off of a deal that already shook up Hollywood, was preparing a mostly cash offer to buy Warner Brothers Discovery, spearheaded by new CEO David Ellison. And a lot of people, including me, thought that this was pretty much a done deal. There'd be some negotiation, but honestly, nobody else was throwing their hat in the ring. Well, apparently there were a few other companies that wanted to do that. After rejecting Paramount's initial offer in late October, Warner Brothers Discovery announced that they were officially open to any offer to buy the company, citing, quote, unsolicited interest from multiple parties. Now, it's always been speculated that David Zaslav's plan, he's the head of WB Discovery, was to sell the company. But it looked like that wasn't going to happen until at least next year, after Warner Brothers Discovery finished its plan to split the company into 2 parts. One consisting of the movie studio and HBO Max, the other consisting of the company's cable networks and other assets. The plan was to dump most of the company's debt on the networks business, leaving the studios and streaming business much more appealing for an acquisition. What may have happened is that in David Ellison's haste to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery so quickly, and the film studio specifically, he unintentionally triggered a bidding war. Instead of buying the company early, before there were any other interested parties, he only succeeded in moving up the timeline. So WB Discovery is now entertaining multiple offers and reportedly setting a deadline for a final sale agreement by the end of the year. David Zaslav reportedly believes that any winning bid should be offering a price of $30 per share and above. That would value the company in the multiple billions of dollars. And the company's already rejected a Paramount Skydance offer of $23.50 per share. Right now, Warner Brothers Discovery stock is trading at around $22.88 per share, although that price has nearly doubled since the news broke that there were buyers interested in acquiring the studio. So let's talk about the companies who submitted bids to buy Warner Brothers Discovery yesterday. The first one, obviously, is Paramount Skydance. Prior to the bidding war, they've had 3 offers rejected, but that doesn't mean that they won't still come up with the best offer. They may just have to pay more than they originally intended. Their deal is also the cleanest of the 3 deals. They want the whole company, networks and all, no spinning anything off, and no splitting up Warner Brothers Discovery. A Paramount Warner Brothers deal would consolidate the 2 major studios, as well as Paramount Plus and HBO Max. Early reports have said that Paramount is inclined to retire the HBO Max brand, but they would absorb the streaming service. While this may seem like it would face tough regulatory issues, the Trump administration reportedly favors Paramount's acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery because Larry Ellison, who's the father of Paramount head David Ellison, is a close political ally of the president's. The Guardian reported this week that he has already spoken with at least one administration official about plans for changes to CNN, which is owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, that the president might be amenable to. It should be stressed, though, that these are unconfirmed reports and that Larry Ellison does not have a formal role at Paramount. But given that the company has already made some changes that the Trump administration praised in their acquisition of CBS News, it seems unlikely that the president or the administration would oppose Paramount also acquiring CNN, he's not a fan of CNN, or making moves that would increase its influence in the industry. While federal regulators and mergers should ideally work outside of the sphere of political influence, that has very rarely been the case under previous administrations and particularly under the current administration. Paramount's bid drew some controversy before it was even submitted due to a Variety report earlier this week that the company was talking to investors from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi to help finance their WB bid. Paramount called the report categorically inaccurate, but other reports have suggested that money from the Middle East could still be used for financing, as well as additional funding from Redbird Capital, which helped to stake Skydance's acquisition of Paramount. The second bidder is Netflix, who at first seemed uninterested but has grown more engaged about acquiring WB Discovery in recent weeks. Netflix is reportedly most interested in the Warner Brothers library of intellectual properties and films, which would be an appealing addition to their streaming service, and an established studio arm would greatly enhance their filmmaking abilities, leaving them less reliant on acquisitions. However, Netflix's Ted Sarandos has shown little desire to release Netflix films theatrically, so there are major questions as to how Warner Brothers films would be released should the studio be acquired by the streamer. Bloomberg first reported this week that Netflix had agreed to continue releasing Warner Brothers movies theatrically, but those reports referred only to contractual agreements to release movies in theaters, likely with filmmakers and films that are already being produced. There is still a big question mark as to the theatrical slate past the studio's current contractual obligations, and it seems likely that Warner Brothers' theatrical footprint would eventually be reduced either through fewer theatrical releases or shorter theatrical windows. Netflix is also reportedly not at all interested in acquiring Warner Brothers Discovery's networks, their cable networks, which would mean that they would likely still have to be spun off into a separate company, which might deter WB Discovery or perhaps appeal to them because they could potentially still dump some debt load on that company. However, a Netflix acquisition of HBO Max might pose the most regulatory issues of any of these deals, given that Netflix and HBO Max already take up a large amount of streaming market share. Some in Congress have already raised regulatory concerns about the two streamers merging, and it's possible that the two may decide that HBO Max would need to be spun off and sold to another buyer for a deal to move forward. Comcast is a somewhat new entrant to this contest, and their interests seem pretty close to Netflix's. They also do not reportedly want the networks, which would likely cause regulatory issues given that Comcast for now owns or has a stake in a lot of existing cable and broadcast networks, but they are interested in the studio and its intellectual property. Universal's already had a lot of success with Harry Potter, which is a Warner Brothers property, and its theme parks, and the ability to add other Warner Brothers movies and characters without licensing the IP could be lucrative. On the streaming side, I think that a merger of HBO Max and Peacock would likely cause much less of a regulatory concern than HBO Max and Netflix, and it would give Comcast a firm foothold in the streaming world that they're largely lacking. No offense to Peacock. A Comcast acquisition of Warner Brothers would also calm any questions about the studio's theatrical releases. Merging Universal and Warner Brothers under one company would almost certainly result in a structure similar to Disney's acquisition of Fox. The two studios would exist basically as brands owned by the same company. However, the regulatory issues that this deal would be spared on the streaming side would probably be more closely reviewed on the studio side, given that Universal and Warner Brothers are currently two of the most successful studios in Hollywood. There is also the possibility that Comcast and Netflix could join their efforts. A Deadline report floated the idea that, quote, Comcast and Netflix could make a joint bid, with the NBC Universal parent retaining HBO Max and the giant streamer, the studios and IP. So Comcast would get their name on a big name streamer, Netflix would get their movie studio, and the Warner Brothers Discovery networks would get spun off on their own. But that doesn't seem to be in the works as of right now. There also exists a none of the above option. If Warner Brothers Discovery deems that none of these bids are worthy, they could decide not to sell, proceed with their plan to split the company, and see what the market will pay later down the line. But I don't think that's going to happen. With a bidding war happening, it's unlikely that there will be a better time than right now, especially with such a shortened window. The number of legacy movie studios that are available for sale is dwindling rapidly, and any serious buyer will likely pay whatever it takes to get their hands on one, especially one as storied and with as big a library as Warner Brothers. David Ellison has also reportedly hinted that he's willing to engage in a hostile takeover, which means taking his offer straight to the shareholders for a vote without executive approval if he feels that his deal is one that the shareholders won't or can't refuse. So in just a couple of months, we've gone from Paramount being the only buyer engaged in any kind of negotiation to multiple studios bidding to buy Warner Brothers. However, it's possible, and some would say likely, that Warner Brothers is going to end up with Paramount, just like everybody expected in the first place. In 2017, it looks like the Disney-Fox deal might not happen, despite a tentative deal being struck. Comcast jumped into the fray and submitted their own offer in 2018, which drove the price up by about $20 billion, but Disney eventually bought Fox anyway. So it's possible that the only thing these new bidders will achieve is making Paramount Skydance pay much more for Warner Brothers Discovery than they originally offered. The result would be the same as if no one had bid at all, but Comcast and Netflix could potentially cost a competitor billions more than they'd planned to spend, which I guess is its own kind of competitive advantage. The unknown element looming over everything, as I've mentioned a few times now, is government regulation. With the Trump administration reportedly supportive of the acquisition of Warner Brothers Discovery by Paramount, WB Discovery and any potential buyer other than Paramount will have to take into account that government regulators may subject any non-Paramount buyer to extra scrutiny. And if a deal falls through because regulators won't approve, it would be a massive waste of time and money for everyone involved. With a president who's unafraid to make his thoughts known publicly and also use federal agencies to enforce his agenda, there is a possibility that Paramount may be the only buyer who could receive government approval under this administration. At this point, we just don't know. So, in my opinion, which outcome do I think is a best case scenario and a worst case scenario? Well, from an entertainment industry standpoint, I think the best case scenario would be this merger or acquisition not happening. I don't think that there's much upside to two major studios merging at this point, but that ship has sailed. So given that, I think that Comcast acquiring Warner Brothers would be the best case scenario industry-wise. It keeps the theatrical business intact and it causes the least amount of disruption. I think a Netflix acquisition would be worst case, looking at it from an industry standpoint, because I think it would further damage the theatrical exhibition business and further destabilize Hollywood. From a societal standpoint, I think that the worst case scenario would be a Paramount Skydance acquisition. The company already owns a major network and that network's news division. It owns a major studio, and it would acquire another major studio and a major cable news division. I think that's too much media consolidation under one company, and I think it's too much media consolidation under one family, the Ellisons, especially if reports that Larry Ellison's Oracle will end up owning a major stake in TikTok turn out to be true. I think it would be naive to ignore the collision that's happening between politics and the media right now, and honestly, I haven't been encouraged by what's happened so far. Nobody should be given that amount of control. I don't care what your politics are. But the truth is, we don't know what's going to happen. There could be another bidder who swoops in at the last minute. It's not unheard of. The only thing that seems certain about the sale is that it is going to happen. And starting yesterday, the final reel of Warner Brothers' existence as a standalone studio has begun to unspool. And like an old-fashioned Saturday morning serial, we'll all have to come back for the next exciting chapter to see how it ends. So that's all the information we have right now as of late Thursday night about this huge Hollywood acquisition/merger. What do you think? What do you think a best case scenario is? What do you think a worst case scenario is? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, stay tuned right here for the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.